think of a famous World War I engagement, and what springs to mind? The Somme, Passchendaele, Verdun, the Australasian go-to, Gallipoli. A blinkered view of the conflict may indeed be written by the victors. For most people listening to this, that was the good guys on Team Commonwealth, the side we were on. The overview, geopolitics of World War I, which was changing allegiances, historic animosities, were complicated to say the least. This was, after all, the first true World War, the first time people went at it with a single weapon that could kill 100 in 15 seconds. Combatants came from over 100 countries, 65 million troops. Brazil, Bolivia, Borneo, Egypt, Finland, Italian Somaliland. Get your jabs before venturing to Middle Congo and Togoland. The casualty numbers were staggering. If you added up just the death toll suffered by members of the British Commonwealth, it would total 180,000. Then there was also Russia's pivotal involvement, largely given secondary status here in the West. In the 5-day Battle of Tannenberg in 1914, 170,000 Russian troops were either killed, wounded or taken prisoner. Total dead in WW1, 20 million soldiers and civilians. This leads us to the starting point to another blank we need to fill in. The Serbian campaign, technically campaigns. This kicked off in 1914. In the first 4 months, the Serbians lost 160,000 dead or wounded. Austro-Hungarians, 275,000 dead or wounded. Then died down again as both sides dug in. Were at it again a year later after an injection of German troops. Now with a sizable advantage in numbers and equipment, the Austro-Hungarian army swept through the Serbs, won the war of attrition. The Serbs were now on the verge of collapse. It looked also likely their eastern neighbours, Bulgaria, were about to kick a man whilst he was down into the war on the Central Powers side. To the south of both Serbia and Bulgaria was Greece. Although neutral at this stage, it wasn't much of a stretch for the Austro-Hungarians and their new allies, the Bulgarians, to keep heading south and take Greece. As Kosovo fell, Britain and France rushed troops to prop up the Serbian front. Allied forces disembarked at the port of Salonika, Greece. A fair call, I suppose it could be called Salonika. Today, that Aegean port is now called Thessaloniki, Thesalonika. The Greeks were powerless to stop Salonika becoming a staging point, logistics base for troops' equipment heading north to bolster the Serbs. I have already touched on the United Nations involved in the overall conflict. A sample of some of the troops fighting on the Allied side in the Serbian campaign include Italians, Greek volunteers, Indians, Vietnamese, Macedonians and West Africans. Fair to say though, the British and French formed the bulk of the force at the pointy end. Those assisting the troops with logistics, engineering and medical backup were the Maltese, Canadians, Scots, Australians and of course New Zealanders. With the bulk of New Zealand and Australian troops 250 kilometres away on the Gallipoli Peninsula, the major roles played here by Kiwis were engineering and medical. There were also a good splattering of Kiwis fighting in English uniforms. Quick side note, this war in Serbia left yet another stain on the role of the British leadership in World War I, not just in Turkey. New Zealand had sent nurses to assist in Greece. They were on board the transport the Marquette, along with engineers, supplies, troops, etc., when the vessel was struck by a U-boat torpedo in October 1915. I have previously covered that tragedy and the cover-up in a previous video. Link in the description, reminder at the end. Those working in the tent hospitals at Salonika had their work cut out. Peak seasons for that, when they were busiest, summer and winter. A holiday on the Med, it wasn't. Articulated well by an article I read by a Kiwi officer attached to the British. To paraphrase,
Salonika is tortoise land. The roads are 4 inches thick with dust and sand. In daytime, the place is boiling. We are constantly fighting with mosquitoes. This must be one of the most loneliest places in the world.
Get the picture? The winter of 1915 was particularly savage. Inhospitable terrain and wide open plains saw the sides dig in at distances far in excess of those on the Western Front, 10 to 15 kilometres in places. Attacks were therefore rather telegraphed and rare events. Because of these distant battle lines, rather than minutes it took charging forward in no man's land, say in Belgium, and troops would need to spend hours avoiding getting shot and blown to pieces in Serbia. That's why the fighting was intermittent, yet intense. Snow and mud made progress impossible for the advancing Austro-Hungarians, save the Serbs in Allied skins. Boredom was now a major issue. The other issue they faced, particularly in summer, on top of the standard rats and lice, insect-borne diseases tore great swathes through both sides. The British Salonika force had 160,000 men taken from the front and treated for malaria alone. They all received regular preventative doses of quinine. Logistics and long supply chains were a nightmare for both sides. This and the terrain saw the Serbian front grind to a stalemate, even with Bulgaria now siding with the Austro-Hungarians and Germans. The mosquitoes and the vermin, they didn't get that order, either in English, Serbo-Croatian or German. You were infinitely more likely to find yourself in a field hospital being treated for malaria, typhoid or dysentery than, say, a shrapnel wound. The 3-year stalemate was only broken when the Greeks ceased being nominally neutral and joined the Allies. The Central Powers' abilities by then to wage war had been eroded to the point they simply ran out of steam. They no longer had the industrial capacity to wage war. This was the background to today's story, a forgotten front, where on most days a medic would be far busier than a rifleman in the trenches. This now leads us to a tradition amongst New Zealand servicemen they have had, at least till recently, that's live mascots and pet companions. Mascots have varied from the bog standard dog to cats, goats and deer. Some of these mascots even went into battle. Major, the bull terrier mascot for the 2nd Expeditionary Force, ended up worse for wear in the Battle of El Alamein. Accumulated adopted pets have ranged from hawks, chickens and even small monkeys in Borneo. Google Shrapnel the Monkey. All of which you can learn more about in a dedicated video I did on New Zealand Military Mascots. Link to that at the end if you're watching this on YouTube, and it's in the description on all podcast platforms. From the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of Borneo. Oh, for God's sake, Paul, don't sing the first verse or hit me with your rhythm stick now. Kiwi servicemen and women, they accumulated camp pets for company. Then, when the gunfire died down, it was time to go home. Bonds were broken. Pets had to wave goodbye as the ship or aircraft went far, far away over the horizon. In and amongst that menagerie, tortoises, a somewhat unfamiliar reptile to many of us. And just to refresh our memories, turtles are water-based, and tortoises are land-based, well, mostly. The turtles have flippers adapted for swimming and tortoises stumpy legs for walking. Despite the broad name, Mediterranean tortoises, also called Greek tortoises, this species can also be found in the Middle East, Africa and the arid areas of Europe as well. New Zealand troops encountered Mediterranean tortoises in Egypt and Turkey, Gallipoli being a good starter for 10. They grow to about 20 centimetres and weigh around 1.5 kilos. These hardy beasts are dedicated herbivores. They'll eat anything. They are also renowned for their robustness and longevity, as this podcast will further emphasise. Well kept, watered and fed. Lifespans go well over 100 years, theorised to be as a result of their slow metabolism. They sleep about 16 to 18 hours a day. Unofficially, there was a report from a Greek village that there was one that lived over 200 years. If you're wondering what a tortoise is like as a pet, clearly they don't need to be walked regularly, and IQ is a hit and miss affair when applied to animals. Let's just say a tortoise or a turtle is on about the same scale as a bright bird, like say a magpie or a crow. They can recognise their owners via sight and sound, particularly those that feed them. They don't have vocal cords. They're not going to bark at the courier or the neighbour's cat. This is what they sound like. On the rare occasion, they give a beep. All of this ties nicely into the main part of our story. Man meets tortoise. That man was New Zealand stretcher bearer Stewart Little from Dunedin. One day, whilst running about the medical tents like a blue-assed fly, he observed one of the local tortoises lumbering across the road when an ammunition gun carriage, what's that, a caisson, bowled straight over the creature. Private Little feared this was now an ex-Greek tortoise. To his surprise, it was injured yet still alive. The tortoise's shell are now permanently scarred with the imprint of the wagon wheel, and it also lost a couple of toes for good measure. An unseasonal recent bit of rain likely saved the reptile from being squashed altogether. Feeling sorry for the tortoise, Private Stewart Little adopted the creature, named it Torty, did what he could to bring it back to full health, fed and watered the reptile, and whilst in 1916 other New Zealanders were having their pets stripped off them dockside for the journey home, Little was able to smuggle him into his pack. Torty simply hibernated for the next couple of months, woke up to find himself in a Dunedin garden, wondering why it was so cold. In summer, he still finds the New Zealand weather cold. 108 years later. That's right, Torty is still alive and still in the Little family, the third generation of them at least, Stewart having died in 1977, a living family heirloom. Torty has lived up and down the country, Havelock North, Palmerston North in the North Island, and still going strong. His shell still has that telltale dent. When Torty goes to meet her maker, she'll be buried alongside Stewart. In human terms, the last World War I combat veteran to die was Charles Churls, a British sailor on board the battleship HMS Revenge. Churls died in 2011, aged 110. His wife also made it into triple figures as well. Churls lied about his age to get into the Royal Navy. By the outbreak of World War II, they'd both immigrated to Perth, Western Australia. An expert in demolition, things that went boom, Churls's role in the Second World War was to set up a system at Fremantle Harbour, Perth, so that if the Japanese landed, they would destroy all the port facilities rather than let them fall into enemy hands. One of the 100,000 men and women who served in World War I, 18,000 of which who died, 41,000 who were injured, including both my grandfathers. Between the two of them, they ended up in hospital 5 times with issues that plagued them for the rest of their lives. The last one of those was Doug Dipley, who was New Zealand's last ANZAC. He was a Gallipoli vet. Doug Dipley died in 1997, aged 101. Seems fitting we go out with what Doug had to say about World War I.
No one wins in the end. The Great War took the best of our young men, and look how many came back maimed and broken. Many suffered dreadfully for the rest of their lives. Anzac Day is important. These men should never be forgotten.
And too right, Doug, for all you YouTubers. I hope you have some more time now to go on to watch those videos I did on the Marquette sinking and Kiwi military mascots. Links to both of those in the description and on all formats. That means if you are listening to this just as a podcast, the links are down below as well. And thanks for your time today. ANZAC Day 2024, a day to remember the men and women who made incredible, unselfish sacrifices for this country. Bye for now.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.